For nearly 2 decades, one of the most effective tools in the U.S. military's arsenal has been arguably one of its most controversial. Depleted uranium ammunition and armor has given American soldiers a tactical advantage over its enemies. But the question is, does the government truly have a handle on what its health effects are on the soldiers exposed to it?
I went into the service because that's a family tradition. It's something I always wanted to do. My dad was in the service, my uncles were in the service, my grandfather was in the service.
Where's Toy? Where's the toy?
Jim Bunker says it was an honor to be among the thousands who served in the first Gulf War. But now he says that same service has left him with unanswered questions about his health.
It was something that just started over time. It was like I was having a little bit of harder time breathing, a little bit of muscle twitches here and there. And later on, started getting muscle cramps and nauseousness.
He was prescribed an assortment of medications, and yet military doctors were not able to immediately pinpoint the cause of Bunker's symptoms. And he wasn't alone. Numerous returning veterans were also reporting weakness, dizziness, or overall changes in health.
What were your symptoms?
Just really bad abdominal cramps, and I couldn't keep any food down. And it was pretty severe at the time.
A common thread in the complaints, many of these soldiers, like Jerry Wheat, had been struck with fragments containing depleted uranium, or had been exposed to the fumes and dust after a tank was hit.
We sat up in positions that were blown out by the coalition forces and that, so you had a lot of tanks and stuff around that had a lot of DU dust around.
The U.S. military uses depleted uranium, or DU, in both ammunition and armor.
Because depleted uranium is radioactive, we assume that there's a radiation risk associated with the exposure.
Colonel Mark Melanson is the head of radiation safety at Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C. He is the military's foremost expert on DU.
All of the studies that have been done where individuals received exposure to uranium and depleted uranium have not shown any adverse health effects.
It's virtually the same script as the Agent Orange saga that happened, where you had people exposed to Agent Orange, returning home, reporting health problems, the government denying that, first of all, Agent Orange was dangerous, and then entering into this debate about who was exposed, how much they were exposed to.
When soldiers come back from theater, we have a very aggressive screening program to make sure that we catch people with valid potentials for exposure and address soldiers' concerns.
Part of that screening program includes filling out this post-deployment health assessment questionnaire. We obtained 5 years of data for nearly 2 million soldiers and found that 54,567 soldiers said they'd been exposed to DU sometimes or often. We compared that data with the 1.9 million soldiers who reported no exposure to DU. Those exposed to DU were twice as likely to report concerns with symptoms like weakness, difficulty breathing, and vomiting, as compared to those who said they were not exposed. And in general, those exposed to DU were twice as likely to characterize their health as poor. Dr. Melissa McDermott is in charge of the DU tracking program at the Baltimore VA. She says the data she has collected suggests little to be concerned about.
Unless you have an ongoing elevated urine uranium concentration, there are not going to be health effects seen down the road.
But while tests for exposure to DU are available, solid scientific data on what it does to the body has not been conclusively determined. The VA admits that research on the human health effects of DU exposure in military occupations is limited, while also citing that chronic exposure by inhalation presents a potential radiologic hazard to the lung. Perhaps even more hazardous than the low levels of radiation DU emits is that it is a highly toxic metal.
We understand how radioactivity can damage DNA and lead to cancer, but no one had ever explored uranium as a chemical.
Dr. Diane Stearns is a metal toxicologist and biochemist at Northern Arizona University. For the last 7 years, she has been studying DU's ability to damage DNA. Stearns found that DU actually binds to DNA and causes cell deaths and mutations.
If we know how it damages DNA, then we know how to protect ourselves and protect the soldiers against harm.
Do we know that yet?
We don't know that yet. There is a lot more research that needs to be done.
A mandated congressional report by the Institute of Medicine last year said it would be difficult to design a study to comprehensively assess the health outcomes of DU exposure in military and veteran populations with currently available data.
I think, unfortunately, in the field of toxicology, usually we're sure something is harmful when people are clearly and quickly harmed. And something like depleted uranium, something that may cause cancer, that's something that's going to happen decades down the road.
Still, the Army maintains that the health risks associated with DU exposure are minimal. Can you say that you're very comfortable with the use of depleted uranium in its current form?
Absolutely.
Jerry Wheat is one of the 77 veterans being tracked by the depleted uranium follow-up program. He is scheduled to travel to the Baltimore VA next week for its 8th evaluation of exposed vets. According to the National Academy of Sciences, more than 300 tons of large-caliber DU munitions were used in Gulf War I. U.S. forces continue to use DU on the battlefield today. Usher Qureshi, KCTV 5 News.